Greetings. In today's talk, um, there was mention of rebirth not being, I want to clarify that I heard it correctly. I played it over a few times and I still wasn't really certain, but I think you were saying that the rebirth isn't determined by a choice of a soul or some divine aspect. That you were saying that that was not the case. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So just to give you a little more detail into that, what I'm saying is in that regard, consciousness is not something that is permanent. It's not something that's an eternal soul or something like that within the Buddhist understanding. Consciousness is dependent upon experience, whether that is the contact that arises, the feeling that arises, the perception that arises, or just the understanding of this mentality and materiality, this mind and body. And so if you look at one of the explanations of dependent origination, it is said that consciousness conditions mentality and materiality. Having then become established in mentality materiality, consciousness is then conditioned by mentality materiality, which means that it is conditioned by the sensory experiences that might arise in the way of our 5 physical senses and our 6 mental sense. When it comes to the process of rebirth in the Buddhist understanding, what happens is at the point of dissolution of the body, there are formations that start to, formations are always active. This is one thing we must understand. At this point in time, in this moment, there are different formations arising and passing away, and depending upon what formations arise and pass away, so too will certain consciousnesses arise and pass away, and so on and so forth. So at the point of death, what happens is these consciousnesses, these formations will create certain emotions, or they will create certain sensory experiences within the mind. So this is all happening at the process of mental contact. There is the idea that there are bardos, from the Tibetan idea of, Tibetan Buddhist idea of different levels of bardos, intermediary points between this life and the next life. We can take that into account into the extent that this is all happening in the mind. These are experiences that are happening at the mental level. And so whatever experiences are arising where there might be memories of this life or another life, or there might be regrets or craving that might arise, if there is craving that attaches to that regret, or craving that attaches to that imagery, or anything that is produced by those formations, through that craving and the intention to attach to those formations, to those images, a new consciousness is driven forward, which will then link with a new mentality and materiality if it's within the human realm, or a new mentality if it's within the realm of the jhanas and so forth. And it spontaneously links with it at the point of conception.
So now
and then at that point, sorry, there was a disturbance. So at that point, when that consciousness links with that new mentality and materiality, there is then that conception within the human birth. And when that fetus is being developed, at that point, there are multiple arisings and passing away of consciousness in the development of that fetus. And so this is where the being, the bhava, is being created, where you have the accumulation of tendencies brought on by the formations that are carried forward by the first consciousness, if you will, that was rooted in the mentality materiality during conception. So with this understanding, you see that there is in no way a unchanging, everlasting consciousness that transmigrates from life to life and takes rebirth. It is not the same consciousness. It is multiple consciousnesses, even within the womb in a human birth or before a human birth. And then when there is birth, there is a new arising of consciousness. And then the whole thing continues on until at a certain point, when you become an arahat, when you have the attainment of an arahat, in the case of parinibbana, there is no formation that is arising in which the consciousness, there's a consciousness that will link with that formation and produce rebirth. And even in the case of the life of that arahat, from full awakening onwards, there is no consciousness becoming established into bhava and then creating a new rebirth. It is all dissipating when it arises, and it dissipates without any attachment, without any craving, without any identification. And so this translates to even in parinibbana, where there is the example of Vakali, who as an arahat, when he passed away from taking the knife, as it said in that sutta, there was a black smoke around Vakali's corpse. And the Buddha explained that this black smoke was Mara looking for the consciousness of Vakali, but unable to find it because there was no intention driven forward that drove out a new consciousness that could then link with a new rebirth, link with a new mentality, materiality through a new rebirth. And so because of that, he had extinguished that consciousness right there and then, along with the rest of the 5 aggregates at the point of parinibbana.
Thank you. I failed to mention earlier that a significant adjustment to my daily living is that I'm eating naturally less food, and I'm not a big eater to begin with, but my appetite is minimal and I'm completely satisfied.
That's very good. That's very good. So you're starting to become more aware of your needs of the body rather than allowing craving for food to determine how much you eat, and just eating as much as the body requires. At least that's how I understand it.
Yes, and it's easy to overdo it. And I notice that, I can feel that as, okay, I could have left that one thing back on the plate.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, when the zygote forms between the fusion of the sperm and the egg, so actually it is the biological component of that. And when does the consciousness and its concomitants enter? Like, do they enter, or because in some yogic traditions they have number of days that they say, between these many days, it's pretty much, it's just biological, and then after these many days it will enter, and then if they have some calculation over it. Is it true, or like what about like, because we do accumulate qualities of the parents, right? If the consciousness is not if it's a continuing one, and it is not actually genetics, maybe a combination of genetics is involved, or is it epigenetics? Sorry, I confused too much, but
No. It makes sense to me. So one thing you have to understand is, as soon as that consciousness takes links, it happens during the fusion of the sperm and the egg. So consciousness begins right there and then. When there is mother and father, when there is a fertile womb and there is a sperm that then joins with that egg, and there is then that creation of life, so to speak, that is where that new consciousness will then establish itself. But at the point of establishing itself, it doesn't continue on. It then dissipates and a new consciousness arises through that process of conception. So the idea that it takes a few days and all of that, I know that in certain Buddhist traditions, there is the idea that for like 49 days, there is no birth happening and there's an intermediary period. It really depends upon how, what kind of understanding you subscribe to. As far as I know and I have seen in the Theravada Buddhist tradition and in the suttas, it's always talking about spontaneous rebirth. So the understanding is that the intermediary phases that are happening with relation to, say, a bardo, as I said, in the Tibetan tradition, or this intermediary phase between death and the next rebirth, is all happening in the mentality or in the mind of the being while they are passing away, just before they pass away. And when I say before they pass away, just before the new consciousness takes root with that formation, and then, you know, is extinct, that body is extinguished, or the four aggregates are extinguished, but that consciousness continues to evolve beyond that body. And with those new formations, they then take root in the new mentality materiality at the point of when the conception happens, as you were talking about. Now, in relation to genetics and epigenetics, the formations that are then taken and carried through, they determine what sort of parents, in terms of the formations, will that person or that new being be introduced to. And so along with that is the genetics of certain dispositions, mentally, emotionally, as well as physically. And that is related to karma. The formations, remember, are carriers of karma. So karma is interwoven within the genetics that the formations take root into that particular being, and then the epigenetics in relation to other genes either arising or being switched off, depending upon choices that that new being makes in that life. So the choices that that being makes determines whether certain genes turn on or off. And so there is always choice involved in that regard in every single moment. And so it's not a predetermined thing that that being, though they might inherit a certain disease, it could be because of just pure genetics and pure imbalances within the body, but it could also be an element of karma. As I said, karma is so intricate that it is always interwoven with all of these different aspects of existence. And so even genetics can be changed to a certain extent based on choices that that being makes.
Well, yeah. So this makes sense. So if this is it, where does the consciousness wait? Like in one of Bhikkhu Bodhi's transit lectures that I listened, so he says the consciousness even during the fusion, it's not there. So do they wait somewhere? Like, is there a room is there a place that they, depending on the mental activities you said?
Yeah, that waiting place would be it would be in the mental sphere, if you will. It will be a mental phenomenon in the mentality of the previous life.
Oh, and that depends on the right time, depending on the karma.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you for that question, Cynthia. I was wanting to ask the same thing, actually. And thank you all for your practice that you're doing. I had another question that was related in some ways. How does things like abortion relate to precepts, for example? And does that boil down to yeah, yeah, I don't know. I'm just curious.
What exactly?
Oh, well, you know, if a couple decides that the best thing for them to do would be to get an abortion, um, how is that going to affect their mindfulness and their ability to walk the path if they are choosing that this is the necessary steps. You know, I believe that at some in certain situations, you know, this is the best thing, and
Yeah.
it's personal, but yeah.
Yeah. So the taking of life in general, taking of life is breaking the precept intentionally, taking that life. So in that process of abortion, that couple has intentionally taken away the possibility of that life to continue. So that is definitely breaking a precept. That would affect their mindfulness. What they do is their karma, that is their intention of taking that life. And perhaps that particular fetus, when that consciousness was infused with that fetus, that was their karma as well, to experience that, and then that will then determine their next set of rebirths. So yes, in short, the taking away of that life through abortion is, in general terms, breaking the precept of intentionally killing a being.
It's interesting though, because if the person or couple's intention is coming from a good and wholesome place where they believe it's the best decision for them, and you know, for this being not to come into life. And I find it's also interesting, the idea that it's the consciousness's karma to be aborted. It's can you expand on that at all? Like, do you have any kind of thoughts on
Yeah.
how the score is being kept? Like, it's
How the score is being kept? Well, it's just a matter of balancing out karma, right? It's a matter of that individual's personal karma. You cannot comment on why or how that happened. It's just a matter of understanding that certain causes and conditions cause that event to arise. In terms of the couple and their intention, if it's rooted in wholesomeness, I could see in no way, if an intention is rooted in wholesomeness, that it would allow for the intention of killing the being. So you'd have to give me a little more clarity and detail on how you see that as being wholesome.
well, for one example, maybe it's not a couple, maybe it's a woman who's been violated, and this violation has brought upon her a pregnancy, and she knows that this child will bring reoccurring pain into her life, and that she will never be able to love the child due to the fact that she might see her violator or whatever. And this could lead to abuse to the child, you know, and you know, just a lot of torment shipped to her. This is, you know, purely a hypothetical example, but it could just be one of many that I could think of where
Okay.
the core belief is from a wholesome place.
Right. So she will, and this is again based on your hypothesis or the hypothetical situation that you're talking about. the intent of killing is still the intent of killing. So there will be karma to be played out from there. But if her intention was to prevent the harm of that child further, that's a different thing altogether. That's not to say that she will not, it's not our place to judge that. But at the same time, the act of killing is outright the act of killing with some intention of killing right there and then. If you kill with a wholesome intention, as you just said, in the sense that she doesn't want that child to continue to be born and then experience a life that will be tormentuous, even so, the act of killing itself is still an unwholesome act. So there will still be karma played out for that reason. And whatever happens with that being happens with that being. If they are aborted and then they take rebirth in a different place, that is their karma.
Thank you.
I have a question about the Buddha was mentioned as a teacher of devas and humans, but I do know of one story. I don't know if it's rooted in the suttas, where an elephant was pacified by the feeling of metta. So does in some way the teaching also in some instance extend to other beings? So let's say animals in this case.
The practice of radiating Brahma Viharas, you're saying. Yeah. Yes, of course. When you send out or radiate the Brahma Viharas, there is a sense of not only the well-being of the person sending it out, but there is a sense of well-being for the being that is having that radiation of metta go to them. So it can be animals, it can be devas, it can be nagas, it can be human beings, it can even be beings in the realm of the hungry ghosts or the hell realms. When you send out compassion, for example, when you are sending it in all directions, you can have the intention of sending it all to all the devas, to all the brahmas, to all the realms above as well as below, which is to say that you want to send it to the animal realm, you want to send it to the hungry ghost realm, you want to send it to the beings that are suffering in the various hell realms as well.
I see. Can I, if I just have a follow-up question, I don't think it applies to Buddhism, but other traditions do have where a saint might preach to the birds or something. Does this happen at all, or not?
I wouldn't know exactly if it's in the suttas or if it's in commentarial tradition where maybe it was preached to, let's say, animals or the birds. As far as I know, when it comes to the tradition, a naga or an animal and such cannot take the going forth and become a monk, for example. But the idea that if there is an animal passing by and listening to a Dhamma talk or a discourse, whether it's by the Buddha or any of the monks, or even in the present time, in my mind, it would seem that the discourse itself, while it may not be understandable to the animal, the fact that it is a pure, it's coming from purity, which is then a sound that reflects in that being's mentality and materiality, creating certain formations that were originated from having listened to that Dhamma talk. It is quite possible that those formations, if they start to get strengthened through next life, to the next life, provides the opportunity to listen more to the Dhamma, whether that animal then becomes a human or whatever it might be. There is the opportunity that for them to develop within the Dhamma. There is on the other side of that, that animal was an animal for whatever reason because of its karma, but that the fact that it came across being able to listen to a Dhamma talk or to discourse was a fruit of its previous actions. Maybe it did something in a lifetime or eons ago or whatever it might be that is now coming to fruition where they are listening to the discourse, and then that provides them the ability to have more formation strengthened within the Dhamma or rooted in the Dhamma, which can provide them with a better rebirth, so to speak. But again, this is not something I would say is rooted in the suttas. It's coming from the understanding of karma and formations. So I wouldn't know of any instances, whether it's in the Jataka tales or whether it's in the suttas or the commentarial tradition. You'd have to take a look at it for yourself.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just wanted to say I thought about this before, and I wanted to thank you, Delson, because you're helping my dog have a good rebirth.
And so are you, because you're radiating loving kindness. So obviously, your best friend is definitely feeling that. So we'll wait for a couple more minutes to see if there are any questions, maybe a minute. And if not, we can share merit. So let's just wait and see.
Well, if I may, once again, it was mentioned karma created eons ago. Maybe this is not the right way of viewing it, but is more karma or karma created at the moment or at any instance than is ever being come to fruition? Or is it in sort of a balance? Do you understand what I'm trying to convey?
Let me make sure I understand correctly. So you're saying that is there some sort of thing that determines when that karma will come to fruition?
Not exactly. I'm trying to ask if there is a certain amount of karma, and at any point, let's say, a certain amount of karma is being fulfilled. Is the karma created lesser, equal, or greater than the karma being fulfilled?
Okay.
Or is that even, does it even, yeah, I don't know if that even makes sense in the...
All right, let me explain the process of karma in just one lifetime. Maybe that will give you some clarity on this. When you have ignorance conditioning formations, you also have the craving conditioning formations, because that's fettered by craving, hindered by ignorance and the sense of conceit that's there. When those formations then activate a certain consciousness, that will then establish itself in a mentality materiality. At that point, at that sensory experience, at the point of contact and then feeling, how one perceives that will then determine whether there will be future craving and future clinging and future becoming or being. If at that point a being lets go of that craving or lets go of the potential for craving to arise, what they are doing is essentially allowing old karma to arise, but no new karma, or rather old karma to come to fruition, but no new karma to arise. But if that being were to crave at that sensory experience, where there is a sense of identification with it, and there is a sense of craving, whether it is attachment or aversion, that will then produce or condition the link that comes after that, which is the clinging. That creates the sense of being, the accumulation of tendencies, which creates more action, which is rooted from that craving, which then actually creates more karma, new karma. So the old karma is all that arises up until the point of your sensory experiences, up until the point of your thoughts and the mind and the experience of the body. So anything from formations up until contact and feeling is old karma. How you react to that will determine whether new karma is produced from that, or the old karma is worn away and no new karma is produced. Now, I also said in relation to thoughts are also karma. So whenever you are doing the meditation practice, whenever the hindrances arise, that is old karma. How you respond to that and how you interact with it will determine whether new thoughts will arise, which means new karma arises. So every time you do the process of right effort and let go of the hindrance and replace it with a wholesome state of mind, in which inevitably activates the 7 enlightenment factors, you are producing no new karma, which means that every time you are in jhana, you are not producing any new karma. You are only dealing with the old karma by letting go, and then by extension, effectively going into jhana and the different elevated states of mind. So this is one way of understanding it. To apply that on the macro level, this is karma that comes to fruition, let's say in one lifetime. But how one responds to that karma in that lifetime determines whether that karmic seed continues to produce new karmic seeds, or is just destroyed right there or worn away bit by bit. The thing about karma is not that it will, as soon as you have the old karma, that it will just dissipate at contact if you don't do anything with it, if you don't produce any new karma. That old karma will be worn bit by bit, meaning it depends upon the strength of that karma, depending upon the strength of the formations that carries out that karma. In the same way, when you look at it in your meditation practice, when you have the hindrances arising, sometimes the hindrances will still remain after you have let go of them. They might come back again. That is still old karma coming into play. So it's not that once you let go of the karma, you let go of it once and for all. It might be let go in stages until it's let go completely. And in some cases, if the karma is very minor, having let go of it, not personalizing it, not identifying with it, and not craving with, that karma will just dissipate right there and then. It depends upon the strength of the karma in relation to the formations and in relation to the reactions of past choices, as well as reactions or responses in the present choices.
That clears things up. Thank you.
So I would like to request if Bhante Ananda would please share merit.
May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty powers, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Delson.
Thank you, Ante.
Yeah. Good retreat.